Good afternoon. You're watching COVID for Two. It's Sunday, August 18th, 2024. You're joining me for a playthrough of Dear Holmes, a new series we're beginning today, a new series of 4 letters. Kind of exciting. It's been a month since we played Dear Holmes case. Let's catch up a little before we get started. You might be able to hear I still have a little bit of a remnants of COVID. Most annoyingly, though, I feel fine, but it's just got a little bit of a cough. So I probably won't be doing my world famous old man voice today. I know that's why you tuned in. Okay, some bookkeeping before we get started. Over the last couple of days, we've been playing through War Story Occupied France, which is a hybrid choose-your-own-adventure tactical battle game with a little bit of resource management. We played through the first mission, and yesterday night, on short notice, we played through it again to see how different it would be the second time through. I absolutely think you could get 2 playthroughs of each of the 3 missions. So far, it's been a very compelling and nail-biting game. I've enjoyed it. I'm not sure when we'll play mission 2. There was some talk about playing it today. Let me think about that. You will also find on the channel from last week, I reviewed 2 of the small box games we've played recently. One called Washed Ashore, which is a much more pure choose your own adventure game, but with a very clever mechanical twist. If you didn't see the playthrough or watch my review of that, you might want to check it out. There's something very clever in that little tiny $12 box. And then we also played, and I put up a review last week, Masters of Crime Vendetta, a new series that has you playing the bad guy while you're trying to solve a mystery and make choices. So we've actually been focusing this last week on all games that have a little bit of choose your own adventure theme to them, mechanic. And we all quite like Masters of Crime. I have one more box that I brought back from Gen Con, and I'd be up for playing that later this week if people want to join for that. Let's check in with the chat. Anyone up to any interesting projects? Here in Champaign, there are 2 events coming up in the next week that might be worth attending if you're interested in game design and are in the area. One is the local group here that runs game design competitions, board game design competitions, called Kudo Plays. They're doing their yearly kickoff on August 28th. I will be there. I am not planning to enter a new game into the competition this year because I've got my hands full working on high and low. Oops, right there, that purple box. And I have been hard at work on it. We'll do another update for that soon. The other event, however, is a little local mini board game convention called Tabletop Central, which starts on September 7th in a nearby town, Savoy. I will be there for that weekend with High and Low, and I'll be running games of it. So if you're interested in writing a case for High and Low, that's the New York Noir mystery game set in the 1930s that I've been working on, I'll be there and you can play it in person, and I'm happy to talk. Okay. Anything else to talk about before we get started here? YouTube says 16 concurrent viewers, 1 like. I've been plugging the Patreon pretty hard lately. Doesn't seem to have any effect. We haven't had a person join the Patreon in a month, but that's okay. I'm going to try to remind myself. I'm not going to feel bad talking about it. You don't feel bad for not joining it. But I do remember this is the feeling. This is when I got rid of the Patreon last time. Felt like, what's the point? But there's a point. There's a point. All right, Dear Holmes. So Did we play an old case last time? I think we did. So as you know, Dear Holmes is a subscription-based service. You get a new letter. It's supposed to be every week, but it doesn't really happen every week. You're lucky if it's every 3 weeks. So they've been going for a couple years now. And we like to play play-by-mail games on Sundays. There's a dearth of them. In fact, this is the only one left for us that's still active. But we are working on play-by-mail games for High and Low, for New York Noir Mysteries, so hopefully we will be able to enter this space soon. But I have a subscription to Dear Holmes that's active and will be for the foreseeable future. Thank you to the Patreons for helping to pay for that. And I've also been trying to get my hands on older letters. They're hard to get. If you have old letters or know someone who does, please get in contact with me. We'll figure out some trade or something. But so that we can have games to play, we've been mixing in a couple of old sets with the brand new sets. And last month we played an older set. But today they've just finished up the final letter of the most recent set called the Celtic Curse, and just recently got the fourth and final letter, so we have enough here to go for the next 4 weeks. But we are playing the latest case. If you do subscribe to Dear Holmes, you also get access to their podcast audio, where you can hear a professional read these stories. Is anyone in the channel a current subscriber to Dear Holmes? I mean, as with most of the games on this channel, it's good if you support these companies. We don't want any of these companies feeling bad that we're playing these games live and that people might watch instead of subscribing on their own. But hopefully we balance out. Hopefully there'll be enough of you who see this and say, well, I don't like listening to Jesse read these letters, but I do like this system, so I'll go subscribe to it. So hopefully we balance out the number of people who are here and the number of people who get interested in this and buy it. Okay, the Celtic Curse. So we've got our first letter here. I did notice that Dear Holmes recently put out an email that I need to respond to. It was asking subscribers what they want to see in future cases in terms of difficulty level and in terms of what kind of puzzles people are interested in. And here in this group, we tend to want games that are harder, but that don't have so many ciphers and abstract puzzles. We like more of the pure psychological deduction. Harder cases, no damn ciphers, says Rob. Which is basically what I said, but more concise. Okay. Let's read our first letter here. John Watson, 221B Baker Street, 30 October 1902. So we're in the 20th century here. Dearest investigator, I pray that this letter finds you well. This afternoon, Holmes and I received a dire plea for assistance. However, we are presently entangled in existing cases. I depart for Scotland later this evening and shall not return for at least several days, whilst Holmes is investigating a peculiar professor in Camden. Thus, as I expect you have already deduced, we find ourselves turning to you. Would you perhaps be willing to look into these matters on our behalf? The case in question was brought to our attention by a Reverend Dorian Skinner, who lives in Amwich. Reverend Skinner fears that an accidental death, which recently occurred during an expedition into local cromlech, is not what it seems. This he believes after learning a series of odd facts from a delivery man and his daughter, Ellis and Rosalind Nichols, who were tending to those on the expedition. In order to assess the situation and determine whether or not there is cause for concern, we must take action immediately. Should you find yourself willing and able to assist, then please begin by reviewing Reverend Skinner's letter to me. His notes on Dylan Dewey and Catherine and Bowen Heather provide substantial context. I expect he will provide additional information in due time. Until then, it would be prudent to address the following queries. 1. Was Mortimer Payne's death the result of the cavern collapse, or did some other elements play a role in his demise? 2. Considering the possibility of foul play, who might have been inclined to harm Mr. Payne, and what would have compelled them to do so? At this stage, we should start by determining if any of those surrounding the deceased stood anything to gain from his death. I will ensure that any additional correspondence is forwarded to you upon arrival. Nonetheless, if you so happen to observe any critical clues or need indeed a theory that explains this case, I implore you to mail your conclusions to the following address. Our American associates will wire any messages to me, and I will act accordingly. You have not only my confidence, but that of Holmes. I trust that you will handle Reverend Skinner's case with both delicacy and efficiency, and regardless of the outcome, worry not. On his return to Baker Street, Holmes will analyze the facts of this case and present you with his own deductions. This, I speculate, will occur within the next 4 weeks. I await your observations and am indebted to you for your kind attention. John H. Watson. Rob says, a cromlech or dolmen is an ancient underground tomb, typically built with several large upright stones and a capstone on top. I have never heard of that, a local cromlech. Okay, expedition, 1 person killed, they suspect foul play. We've been charged to find out if his death was foul play or accident. Who would have wanted to hurt him? Who stood to gain? That's okay. Single-sided piece of paper here. All right, but we have more letters. Let's more in this envelope. 2 more sheets of paper. Here is something from the St. Elith Church in Amwich, Great Britain. October 27, 1702. What's going on? This is 200 years old? Oh, no, 1902. Sorry. Okay, so a week later is this letter. Dear Mr. Holmes, I am a voracious reader, and among my favorite writings are accounts of your investigations, as chronicled by Dr. Watson in the Strand. I suppose it is due to my background in sociology, a graduate of Bangor University, that I have become an amateur sleuth. My investigations are modest, to say the least. The disappearance of a young woman in Harwich, mysterious deaths of sheep on Hendy's farm, and a strange undiagnosable illness in Barmouth. But I have never investigated the death of a person, and question my capacities to do so. If you would give me the benefit of your intellect and experience, I am prepared to be your eyes, ears, nose, hands, and feet. The case I refer to, if we might call it that, regards a noteworthy British archaeologist, Mortimer Payne. His body was retrieved from a cavern near Bodweird this week. The cave suffered a terrible collapse, yet a melding of circumstances and portentous facts suggests to me that there is something to his death beyond the accident. I will confess that my fear in part stems from Samhain being upon us, a time when ancient superstitions and dark dreams abound. So it is my hope you will be able to scrutinize the facts in ways I cannot, free of the anxieties plaguing my mind. I present you with all that I have gathered thus far. Mr. Payne, being something akin to celebrity, garnered a welcome by me and some of the local flock when he stepped from the train with his entourage 9 days ago. Among the gathering was an old woman who pushed her way forward with an offering in hand. "A talisman," she croaked. "Keep this near, for evil awaits." Payne brushed her aside, sending the talisman to the ground. In response, the old dame cried, "Then let the devil have you." Those who heard this froze in fear because, as most of my neighbors would agree, Mortimer Payne had just been cursed. The crone's malediction bore its fruit on Tuesday evening last, 28 October, when a rescue party led by my parishioner, Ellis Nichols, a Din Dosparthu delivery man, recovered Mortimer Payne's body from a cavern he was exploring. The site was located on property owned by Catherine and Bowen Heather. Lest you think superstition has warped my brain, let me share what Ellis and his daughter, Rosalind Nichols, told me of the ordeal. I'm grateful that we were not in a confessional so that I may speak freely. Ellis tells me that Mr. Payne had assembled an eclectic team before arriving at Boldweird, comprising himself and 4 other persons: Fiona, his recently married wife; Colin Biddle, a colleague from the British Museum's Antiquities section; Rory Campbell, a reporter from the Scotsman newspaper; and Dylan Dewey, functioned as their local guide and liaison. On 20 October, Ellis Nichols transported this party and their equipment from Holyhead Station to the Heathers Farm, 8 miles from Boldweird. He assisted in setting up camp, and as he was leaving, Mrs. Payne provided him with a list of supplies and asked that he return with them no sooner than 3 days later. Ellis reported that the troops were in good health and better spirits when he departed. Now, true to his agreement, he returned with the provisions requested on the morning of 24 October. When he arrived, Mrs. Payne and Rory Campbell greeted him. The latter helped Ellis unload the supplies, allowing him to ask why the Scot was a member of the dig. Campbell's response was, "I'm the fella what found the tomb here. Stumbled upon it on a hiking fair." Indeed, it was he who reported the discovery to the British Museum. Ellis did not converse with the group much more that day, but prior to his departure, Mrs. Payne asked him to continue his deliveries every 4th day until notified. She gave him a new list and paid for the day's delivery and in advance for the next one. The morning of 27 October, Ellis determined to deliver the expedition's provisions a day early, as he had forgotten a commitment to another client on the 28th. On this occasion, he took his daughter Rosalind, or simply Rosie, with him. Though shy of 10 years, she possesses a keen interest in all things scientific, and when her father mentioned an archaeological dig, he found it impossible to keep her at home. His daughter sometimes plays along the ruins with her friends, as they offer excellent hiding places. Consequently, she fancies herself an expert on the terrain. When they arrived at the camp, Rosie and her father found all 5 members of the party sitting about rather than digging in the dirt, as the young girl put it. It was she, Ellis told me, who dashed forward on their arrival and began tugging on Mr. Payne's sleeve. "How are your explorations proceeding, mister?" she asked, taking the words from her father's mouth. "Oh, coming along, milady," was his only reply. Rosie then wanted to chat with the beautiful lady, Mrs. Payne, but her father thought it best to leave the camp at once. He notes it was apparent that Payne and the others were suffering from an overabundance of spirits. Here I will annotate that Ellis's supplies that day included several lengths of rope, a hatchet, lantern, fuel, tinned peaches, cooked lunch tongue, and tinned salmon. Also, of particular note, were 3 bottles of costly Glenturret Scotch whiskey. This was notable, Ellis explained, because there were at least 3 bottles of the same Scotch in my first delivery. So they're drinking it up there. Precisely 1 day later, on 28 October, Mrs. Fiona Payne stumbled up to a farmhouse belonging to Bowen and Catherine Heather, who owned the property where the dig was taking place. Mrs. Payne, in grimy and torn clothing, banged on their door, bellowing about a roof fall and the 4 men being trapped. She had discovered the collapse less than an hour earlier, after the men failed to return from the cavern for their midday meal. Mr. Heather told Ellis that the poor woman was suffering from the vapors, so he was forced to leave her with his wife, Catherine, before seeking help. It was not until nightfall that the men of Boldweird succeeded in digging through the rubble that had sealed the Cromwich entrance. It was unclear how the collapse occurred, for no bodies were discovered in the wreckage, but the event was not without casualties. It appears that Mr. Payne suffered a great fall inside the cavern, which fatally wounded his skull. A massive wound on the back of his head supports this report, as do the survivors of the incident. Once extricated, Biddle, Campbell, and Dewey all independently testified as to the terrible accident. Ellis confided in me that he was reticent to accept the word of strangers, but that their local guide, Dylan Dewey, lent enough credibility to dissuade him from reporting the incident to the local magistrate. This would seem to have been the end of it, were it not for a conversation I had with Ellis the following morning. I was preparing Payne's body for its return to London. Ellis had come to take the coffin to Holyhead Station, with Precious Rosie in tow. He poked his head in my door close to 8 in the morning, sheepishly asking if Rosie could view the body. I was aghast until Ellis explained that his daughter's curiosity was boundless. "Does her mother know?" I asked. "No. She insists I refrain from squelching our angel's curiosity." Ellis sighed. After this, he signaled for young Rosie, who solemnly approached the body on the table. The lass carefully pointed her finger toward Mr. Payne's cheek and asked, "May I touch him?" she asked. I shook my head. "Best leave him be, I think." She nodded and merely stared at the corpse for some time before thanking me and skipping back to the wagon. Following this, Ellis asked if we could have a confidential chat. I offered to visit the confessional box, but he shook his head. "It's not me who should seek forgiveness." Before me stood a troubled parishioner. Ellis was concerned about something that happened during the expedition, but had been holding his tongue. In his words, I dunna wanna cast aspersions on proper folk or a fella, Welshman, but their accounts ring hollow to me, he whispered. Only after a cascade of innuendos did I realize that Ellis was asking me to investigate the incident. I do not believe fear prevented him from being forthcoming, but rather a lack of evidence to support his intuitions that something foul and evil happened inside that cave. The relief on his face was evident when I told him I would look into Payne's death. Since making that declaration, I have borrowed from your methods and have interviewed Farmer Heather, his wife, and Dylan Dewey as well. What I have learned suggests that I will need to continue my inquiries in London, possibly beyond, where I might find Biddle and Campbell. Being a fish out of water in the old smoke, I would feel more comfortable doing so with your guidance. That is, if you do believe further investigation is merited. I will include my notes here so you may judge for yourself. Okay, Bo and Heather. I paid a pastoral call on the Heathers, who played a small but essential role in this drama. If you recall, the infamous cavern, and therefore the encampment, stands on Mr. Heather's land. It was he who took in Mrs. Payne before assembling a rescue party. Maybe we should take a pause here. Okay, let's just take a look. All right, so accident, crashed, killed. The delivery guy and his daughter are suspicious. It's mainly the daughter, Rosie, who's super curious, who seems to have figured out something's amiss, but we're not told what has inspired him to think something is wrong. And the whole party seems to have the same story, so they'd all have to be working together. The daughter wants to touch the body. He says no. And our guy, the preacher here, is agreeing to investigate. Okay, so he's gone and interviewed everyone. Here we go. Check in with the chat, see how everyone is doing. Rob says, Glenturret is Scotland's oldest working whiskey distillery, founded 1763. Wow. Okay. Anna has stopped by. All right, I'm already love this little daughter, this little 10-year-old savant. I can see she's going to play a role in this story. Okay, let's read what he says about people. All right, regarding Bo and Heather. I paid a pastoral call on the Heathers, who played a small but essential role in this drama. If you recall, the infamous cavern, and therefore the encampment, stands on Mr. Heather's land. It was he who took in Mrs. Payne before assembling a rescue party in Bodward. In his brief encounter with Fiona Payne, he judges her as a beta, a strong woman. She may be a Scot, but she has the heart of a Welshwoman. He told me, and I believe he felt it. Was admirable that a Gentile woman had trekked through rugged terrain to his farmstead. I suspect it did not hurt. She was also a beaut, as he put it. I asked him if he could confirm Ellis's report that Fiona Payne had the vapors. Hysteric, Mr. Heather called it, adding, the woman wailed like a gwillion. Couldn't catch me breath till Kate took her in hand. All right, I guess the vapor, she was in shock or something, hysterical. When I asked about the rescue effort, he said it took, about 3 hours to gather the men, shovels, picks, and lanterns, and then drive to the cavern. We was there just before nightfall. Mr. Heather described the cave entrance as humorously narrow, such that rescuers were forced to work in shifts of 3 at a time. It took them another 4 hours to make their way past the collapsed portions and access the actual cave. And fearing another collapse, they did not enter for another 30 minutes or so, after calling out to those inside and receiving no reply. This compelled Ellis and one other man to enter with lanterns, and whereafter they spotted Professor Biddle and Rory Campbell, cowering in one of the tunnels alongside a far wall. The rescuers had to personally lead them back out and to the camp because a lantern's light was too bright, painful to their eyes. They were quite disoriented. When they returned for the remaining 2, Dylan Dewey had found his way out to the entrance, where he had finally collapsed. He feared Mr. Payne is still trapped inside. When he noticed the rescuers were uneasy, he insisted he return to the cave with them. Mr. Heather recalls that the man charged into the darkness, a lantern held high, shouting, "It's me duty to him." It took them some time to work their way through the stones that had fallen during the cave-in, but the rescuers found Payne within the hour. He was not alive when they came upon him, but the cause of his death was clear, a gash on his skull caused by a fall. When they returned to the camp with the body, the rescue party noted, great amounts of viscid blood covering Payne's neck, shoulders, and back. Okay, here's the discussion of Catherine Heather. After I chatted with Bowen Heather, I asked if I might talk to his wife, Catherine. He was circumspect, but she was eager to help solve this puzzle. I first asked her about Mrs. Payne's condition when she arrived at their home. Would you describe her as hysterical? I questioned yet again. No, she stated, before delivering proper lecture on a rather common misconceptions regarding a woman's temperament. In Mrs. Catherine Heather's word, Fiona was anxious, understandably anxious. A cave had just fallen on her husband and his associates. I could hardly understand a word she said at first. But with the help of a dram of whiskey, she made plain what had occurred. The cave had collapsed. I asked Mrs. Heather precisely how Mrs. Payne received the news about her husband, that is, how she came to learn of it and how she reacted. Well, of course, Mrs. Payne took it poorly, Mrs. Heather reported. The reporter came bearing the news. Rory Campbell, poor Fiona, wept and wept. She fell into Mr. Campbell's arms for some minutes before bracing herself with another dram and demanding they return to the camp. I should note that prior to my departure, Mrs. Heather insisted I take with me a basket of pears, apples, and walnuts, all harvested from their land. Can't have you leaving without a gift now, she sang as I left. Besides, who doesn't like a nice treat? Now, as for Dylan Dewey, you should know, Mr. Holmes, Dylan Dewey is a legend in these parts and possesses the physique most would associate with depictions of a hero. He stands a head taller than most men, has ebony hair that cascades down his imposing shoulders, and most around here would say he's practically an angel. I've only seen him in St. Ellis for weddings and funerals because he walks in the old way of the Welsh ancients. In days past, I've glimpsed him dropping a penny in a well and tying a scrap of fabric to a tree branch. These are votive offerings, I understand. Locals believe he's deep into pagan ways because of this. How this fellow came to guide an archaeological expedition was a puzzlement to me, but he put this question to rest the moment I met him. My grandmother taught me to tend our lands, he declared. My family owns the land near Torslin that Mr. Payne explored a year ago. That's where we met, Dylan said. Who else knows this land better than I? I then asked Dylan if he was well paid or promised a portion of any treasure found if a hoard were to have been discovered in the Cromwich. He scoffed at this notion. Oh, they found no treasure, and why would they? It was not the resting place of any king or warrior. Amergin Glynjol was a priest. It was a sacred place, and I wager it was the geas that killed Mortimer Payne. Dylan insisted that if anything within had been disturbed, treasure or not, it will have unleashed a gaze upon the travelers. Payne was told that the devil would have his head if he entered the Cromwich, and look at the poor soul now. I commended the man for crawling back into the cavern after his own narrow escape, and Dylan merely swept his long hair from his shoulders as he shrugged, "Oh, my God-bound duty." When asked if he was fearful of guiding another expedition, he answered, "If they dig in our cherished land, I must watch over 'em." So there you have it. I withhold my thoughts, imparting only facts. Please tell me what you make of this. Most especially if you believe I should pursue the matter further in the city. Yours in the Lord, Reverend Dorian Skinner. Okay, well, he's taken it upon himself to investigate. We've got a very interesting set of characters so far. The owners of the land where the dig was, Bowen and Catherine Heather. The local hero, Dylan Dewey. Rosalind and Ellis, the delivery man and his daughter. Now, did we miss anything? Is that it? I guess we've read it all now. Let me just make sure. We've got Watson's letter, single-sided. And then we've got the letter from the local preacher, who's an amateur sleuth. Everything looked on the up and up till the delivery man and his daughter said they think something's fishy going on, but wouldn't really say what. He doesn't want to implicate anyone. It's just his intuitions. And the daughter has seemed to have some theory, but didn't want to tell us about it. And then we get told about the preacher agrees to do some investigating, and he goes and talks to various people in town. The owners of the land, Bowen and Catherine Heather, they're the ones who got the call when there was an accident to form a rescue party. The woman came, said there's been an accident, and they go and start a rescue party. There's an interesting scene where the wife of the person trapped in the cave is in the arms of one of the other men, Mr. Campbell's arms, for some minutes, gives her a dram of whiskey to let her regain her senses, then she leads. And then Dylan Dewey, the local pagan hero guy who acted as their guide, we're told is brave and rushes in to rescue him. All right. Well, a very fun intro to a case. In fact, one of the cases we've read, this may be one of my favorite little setups. Although no real mysteries for us from the start, right? Normally we're told of some odd facts that seem irreconcilable to us. Here we've got a case where we have no facts yet that stand out as being suspicious. Everything really looks on the front of it, on the surface, looks fine. He's got a wound in the back of his head. People are acting a little suspicious, but no suspicious facts. The one thing that jumps out at me, so there's two, I would say, well, let's file this away and then we'll talk about it a little. Let me ask the audience, any observations, anything jump out as noteworthy from the first reading? I would say that two facts jump out to me as being noteworthy. Well, maybe two or three. Rob says, I suspect a connection to the previous expedition. I'm just filing these. This is our system that we've adopted to let us highlight and make notes without writing on the letters themselves, the way I did in our first year of playthroughs of these. Now I try to keep them unmarked so that I can trade them away. All right, let's see what the group thinks is interesting. Marlene says the downplay on what they will find stood out. Joji says, I was thinking the same, Rob, about the previous expedition. I think there are alternatives and suspect they will present themselves as the story goes on. Well, Holmes always advises, don't jump to conclusions, don't theorize, just focus on the facts. But here on this channel, we take the opposite approach, which is constant theorizing, constant hypothesizing, jump to conclusions, and then revise them as we go. And that's not because I think that's a better technique of deduction, but just because it's more entertaining to play that way. And also because it lets us give credit to the people who figured out things early. It's good practice. So, a couple things jumped out to me. Let me highlight them. One of the things that jumps out is already noted explicitly by our preacher. What's the preacher's name? Dorian Skinner. Okay, so Dorian Skinner makes an observation that was quite insightful. I'm not sure where, but he says, look, these foreigners, I would normally be suspicious of them all having the same story. But then there's this local guy that also backs them up. And he says, that's noteworthy, and I agree with him. Like, it's easy for one group of friends to form a scheme and come up with the story, but it's much harder to bring in someone who's new to the group, who's a local, to be part of their story. They're clearly drinking a lot, that there's that too. He doesn't even remember, he doesn't even want that's why that's why the delivery guy takes his daughter, because they're suffering from an overabundance of spirits. In other words, they're drinking. Where's my little, I bought these new highlighters. Let me see if this works for us. Overabundance of spirits. I don't know if this is a better way to do it, but it is erasable, so maybe. Let me see, it's a little dark. Trying to find a good way to let us mark these up. Can we even see that? Not maybe a little bit. Okay. Now, so this is a part of the puzzle that I think has to be explained if something's gone wrong here. How did they get this local guy in on this fake explanation, if it is a fake explanation? There's something a little suspicious, though, about... Oh, there's something suspicious about how this guy rushes back in. It seems a little staged. But I noticed something else here too. Okay, so let's see. They go to the farmhouse. They say, we're gonna dig in this thing. Then there's a roof fall. She comes to tell them. And then they convince them not to report it. That was a little suspicious. Where is that part? Wound on the back of his head, lots of blood. They have to rescue the other people who are trapped. So I mean, they do seem actually trapped. So it's hard. It would be hard to like stage that. You would be risking your life if they were all staging that. Here's where he says he'd be reluctant to accept the word of strangers, but Dylan Dewey lent enough credibility to dissuade him from reporting the incident to the local magistrate. So I guess it's not clear that they tried to convince him It doesn't sound like they tried to convince him not to report it, just that the local guy dissuaded him from reporting it. Oops, what happened? Oh, look at that. It thought the yellow and the red together were my cubes. All right. Don't care about that. Anything else jump out? The part where she says, "Can I touch him?" That's weird. Why does this little 10-year-old girl know that we don't? Why that she wants to touch him? Maybe she's just curious. This isn't working, but this will. Nope, that won't. All right, I'm not sure these pens are going to work for us. Go back to our old system. Where is our old system? Okay. Now, why is he suspicious? Concerned about something that happened. He says it's not fear, but intuition. Something foul and evil happened inside that cave. Okay, so he thinks something sort of satanic is going on. And is it because of that old lady? That was the other very odd thing, right? This seems a little suspicious too. Took them 3 hours. They go back. Very narrow. Took them a while to dig them out. They called. They had no reply. It's a little odd. Why is there no reply? They spotted them cowering in one of the tunnels. Why are they cowering and afraid to call out? They lead them back. The lantern's light was too bright, painful for their eyes. This is all weird. Like, why are they really that? How long have they been in here? That don't they have their own torches and lights? Very odd. Disoriented. That's also odd. When they return for the remaining two, so they see Biddle and Rory Campbell. They lead them out. They return for the remaining two, which is the dead guy and someone else. Dylan Dewey had found his way to the entrance where he had finally collapsed. So there's two left. It's Dylan Dewey and Payne. Dylan Dewey has found his own way out. And then he insists he go back with them. And he charged into the darkness. It's my duty to him. I mean, this is very weird, right? Our local guy is suspicious. He finds his own way out and then he rushes back in to save him. Why didn't he just stay in there and try to save him? Took them some time to work their way through the stones. They finally found him within the hour. He was dead. So I'm very suspicious of this local guy who wants to look like a hero. And then they describe the body, great amounts of viscid blood covering his neck, shoulders, and back. Now, okay, so already this is a little bit suspicious, maybe depending on how they find him. I guess it's only suspicious depending on how long it's been and in what position he was found, that the blood got to his head, neck, shoulders, and back. So it's sort of run down his back. Presumably he was hit in the back, but he didn't fall forward. He fell on his back. She says she was anxious, and the reporter came bearing the news, Rory Campbell. Rory Campbell is the reporter of the group, and then falls into his arms. That's a little bit fishy. No, this is not what I wanted. I wanted the part where she falls into this guy's arms, like they're having a little bit of an affair. I'm not sure that makes her so suspicious. Dylan Dewey is the person I'm suspicious of. He looks like a hero. What does this line mean? I've only seen him in St. Ellis. Oh, I've only seen him in the church for weddings and funerals because he's not religious. He's part of this pagan religion, maybe. Walks in the way of the old Welsh. So that sounds like you're basically saying he follows the old religions. He's pagan in some way. And he has these superstitions. He says, my grandmother taught me to tend our lands. My family owns the land near Twerslin that Mr. Payne explored a year ago. That's where we met. So he isn't a pure stranger to this group. He's involved with this group for a year. He says, are you paid? And he says, no. Actually, he doesn't answer. He just says, they found no treasure. Why would they? He says it was a sacred place. I wager it was this whatever angel that killed him, spirit. And he says, did anything get disturbed? And he says, well, this whole crash is because this Geist must mean ghost or something, was unleashed. Payne was told that the devil would have his head if he entered the cromlech, and look at him now. So Dylan seems to claim this has all happened because he's disturbed this spirit. He says, I commended him for crawling back in there, and he says, it was my duty, my God-bound duty, but he doesn't believe in God. When asked if he was fearful, he said, if they dig in our land, I must watch over them. I wonder if this isn't more of a case of he's upset that they're digging in the land. He told them, if they dig in here, you're going to be in trouble. The spirits are going to get you, and then they did. So I wonder if he's not like punishing them. And then let's not forget that whole scene with the woman on the train. Where is that scene? Right up front. So Mr. Payne arrives, and there's an old woman who gives him a talisman, tries to give him a talisman, and he pushed it away. Talisman fell. Let the devil have you. So on one hand, it sounds like it's a little bit of a superstition, pagan spirits, and he's being punished. This feels like it's pointing to Dylan Dewey and this woman sort of coming up with some scheme to punish him for digging on their lands. But then we've got this side issue of did Mr. Payne's wife have him killed so she could get together with the newspaper guy? Seems a bit far-fetched. Marlene says they described the blood but not the injury. Is that true? I think we're told there was a big wound on the back of his head. But there is the weird blood dripping down his back. That does seem to suggest something. Let's see. Prepared the body. Pointed towards Mr. Payne's cheek. Asked, may I touch him? That would be normal curiosity of a child, so maybe nothing weird about the cheek or anything. I thought we're told a little bit about the wound. Maybe it's in the original letter from Watson. I mean, the preacher who's writing to us, the one who we trust implicitly, has seen and worked on the body. So you have to assume that the wound is consistent and real. Now, it doesn't mean he wasn't struck by a rock held by someone, but it does seem to suggest that on face glance, on the face of it, the wound is consistent. It appears Mr. Payne suffered a great fall, which fatally wounded his skull. A massive wound on the back of his head supports this report. So he does have a massive wound on the back of his head. I don't know why it says suffered a great fall. I think it must mean that the rocks fell in on him. Joji says, a geis is a taboo or a spell to prohibit something in Irish and Scottish mythology, similar to be under a curse. I see, geis curse. All right, well, there's our hour. I love the setup. I love the very small cast of characters. I always like when there's a nice small cast of characters for us to suspect. But so far, all suspicions. We don't even know why this guy's suspicious. No strange facts to reconcile. I guess the second letter is going to be where things really start to unfold. We'll play the second letter next weekend, Sunday, 1 p.m., same normal time. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you all next time.